Hello and welcome to lesson 13-3, interpret numerical expressions. So what does that mean? When you interpret a numerical expression, you're figuring out what it is they're trying to tell you. So what do those numbers represent? What information can you gather by looking at that equation? Let's watch our short video and then hop into our notes.
How can you interpret numerical expressions without evaluating them? Let's find out. Jimmy's clown costume requires 7/8 plus 1/2 plus 1 3/4 yards of fabric. His dad's matching clown costume requires 3 times open parentheses 7/8 plus 1/2 plus 1 3/4 close parentheses yards. How does the amount of fabric needed for the dad's costume compare to the amount needed for Jimmy's costume? You can compare the expressions and solve the problem without doing any calculations. Hard to believe? Let's see how. First, interpret the part of each expression that is the same. Jimmy's costume requires 7/8 plus 1/2 plus 1 3/4 yards of fabric. His dad's costume requires 3 times open parentheses 7/8 plus 1/2 plus 1 3/4 close parentheses yards. Both expressions contain the sum 7/8 plus 1/2 plus 1 3/4. This is the amount of fabric needed for Jimmy's costume. Why does the sum show the amount of fabric needed for Jimmy's clown costume? The sign shows a child's costume takes 7/8 yard of blue fabric, 1/2 yard of yellow, and 1 3/4 yards of polka dot fabric. Next, interpret the part of each expression that is different. The second expression shows that the sum is multiplied by 3. So the dad's costume requires 3 times as much fabric as Jimmy's costume.
Remember, multiplying by 3 means 3 times as much.
Do you need to add the fractions to answer the question in the problem? Explain. No, you can use what you know about the meaning of operations to answer the question without actually evaluating the expression, which would involve adding the fractions. Could you compare the expressions without evaluating if the sums weren't exactly the same?
Select your answer.
No, Jimmy's dad's costume wouldn't require 3 times as much fabric as Jimmy's if the sums weren't exactly the same. Now you know how to interpret numerical expressions without evaluating them.
All right, let's go ahead and take a look at our notes and guided practice. So here we saw that we can compare equations without actually solving to find the actual answer. Now, when you have a lot of parts of your equation that overlap and there's one area that's different, it's very easy to decide the difference or find the difference between them, or to decide which one is greater than or less than in value than the other one. All right, now our notes for this lesson: interpret numerical expressions. How can you interpret numerical expressions without evaluating them, which is just a fancy way of saying, how can you figure out what they're saying or telling you without solving and doing the actual math? Now, our first example says Mrs. Katz is planning her family's trip to the museum. She made a list of the expenses, and then she wrote the following expression to show how she can calculate the total cost. Now, here we have the expenses for each person. The bus fare is $4.20. The buffet lunch is $8. The entrance fee is $12. And the dinosaur lecture is $3.50. Now, the expression that she wrote is 6 times the sum of $4.20 plus $8 plus $12 plus $3.50. Now, the question is asking us, how many people do you think are in the family, and how can you tell? while the table on the right shows us the cost for the expenses for each person. And the expression tells us that she's multiplying those expenses by 6. So that must mean that there are 6 people in the family. All right, next, Peter bought 4 times 2 1/4 plus half plus 2 7/8 yard of ribbon. Marilyn bought 4 times the sum of 2 1/4 plus half plus 3 yards of ribbon. Without doing any calculations, who bought more ribbon? Explain. So here I lined up the calculations. 4 times the sum of 2 1/4 plus half plus 2 7/8. And then 4 times the sum of 2 1/4 plus half plus 3. Now I can compare the two expressions without solving because I can see that both of them multiply the sum by 4. Both of them have in their parentheses 2 1/4 yards plus half a yard. Now the only difference is in their last measurement. One has 2 7/8 of a yard and one has 3 yards. Now, because we know 2 7/8 is less than 3, I can tell right away that Marilyn bought more yards of ribbon than Peter did. So I compared all the different parts of my equation. I found out where it's different, and then I was able to do my comparison. Our next example says, without doing any calculations, write greater than, less than, or equal to. So our first expression says 15 times the sum of 3 6/10 and 9 44/100. And we have to decide if that was greater than, less than, or equal to 15 times 3 6/10 plus 15 times 9 44/100. Now these are equal because the second expression shows us using the distributive property. So the second expression says we did the 15 times the 3 6/10, and then we did the 15 times the 9 44/100. So it gives us an equivalent amount. Our next example says, without doing any calculations, describe how expression A compares to expression B. So here's A and here's B. A says 418 times 1/4 plus 418 times 1/2. Expression B says 4 1/18 times 3/4. Now let's stop and think at the numbers that we're using here. Let's think about those. Both of them multiply 418 by something. The first one is 418 times 1/4 and 1/2. The second one is 418 times 3/4. Now I know the sum of 1/2 and 1/4 is going to be 3/4. Because we know that 1/2 is an equivalent fraction for 2/4. So 1/4 plus 2/4 is 3/4. So 4 1/8 times 3/4 is equal to the same value of 4 1/8 times 1/4 plus 4 1/8 times 1/2. These two are equivalent to each other. Next, let's look at our guided practice. The number of yards of fabric needed for Rob's costume is 7/8 plus 1/2 plus 1 3/4 divided by 2. How does the amount of fabric needed for Rob's costume compare to the amount needed for Jimmy's costume? This is the one we saw in our video lesson. Now we know Jimmy's costume was 7/8 plus 1/2 plus 1 3/4. So I'm going to compare them. Rob's costume was the sum of 7/8 plus 1/2 plus 1 3/4 divided by 2, compared to Jimmy's that was 7/8 plus 1/2 plus 1 3/4. Now the only difference here is that Rob's costume is half of that amount, so it's divided by 2. So we know that Rob's costume needs half as much fabric as Jimmy's, so Rob's costume, the total amount of fabric is less than the total amount needed for Jimmy's. For number 2, without doing any calculations, explain why the following sentence is true, why the following number sentence is true. 14 plus the product of 413 times 7 is greater than 6 plus the product of 413 times 7. Now, both of these are adding to the product of 413 and 7, but one is adding 14 to that total and the other one is adding 6 to that total. Since 14 is greater than 6, we know that that equation is true. For number 3 and 4, we're comparing, or 3, 4, and 5, we're comparing these different equations. For number 3, it's asking us equation A compared to equation B. So equation A says 8 times the difference of 41,516 minus 978 compared to 41,516 minus 987. Sorry, 87 for both of them. So the first one is 8 times greater because it's 8 times that difference. So equation A is 8 times greater than equation B. For number 4, 7 times the sum of 4 3/8 and 3 1/2 compared to 22 times the sum of 4 3/8 and 3 1/2. Now the only difference here is what we're multiplying on the outside. One is 7 multiplied by that sum. The other one is 22 multiplied by that sum. And we know that 22 is greater than 7. Apologies, guys, one moment. There we go. And for our last one, we have 8 2/10 plus the quotient of 7 1/10 divided by 5. And then our next one is in the quotient of 7 1/10 divided by 5 plus 8 2/10. Now here all we did was we used the commutative property to move this to the other side of the equation. So these are equal. What's inside the parentheses is equal on both sides. And then we're adding 8 2/10 to that quotient. So these two expressions are equal. All right, that takes us to the end of this lesson. If you have any questions, let me know. Otherwise, have a great day. Take care. Bye-bye.